Dr. Don here, the Wizard of Art. Welcome to Start Art. Today we have a very special guest. This guest brings the force with him. None other than Mr. Lorne Peterson from Lucasfilms Limited in Marin County. You know, the Star Wars people. Today, Lorne will discuss with us all that you're dying to know. Darth Vader won't be here today, but we do have Mr. Lorne Peterson from Industrial Light and Magic. Stay where you are. Start Art is on the air. Don't miss this force.
You ought to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. To find he is a wizard of whiz, if ever a whiz there was. If ever a whiz
Welcome to Start Art. This is Dr. Don, the Wizard of Art, and believe it or not, the force is with us today. We have Mr. Lorne Peterson from ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, a division of George Lucas Films Limited, and we are honored to have him here today. Where were you born?
I was born in Canada.
Canada.
My parents were immigrants. My father came from Sweden, and my mother came from a farm in Canada. And I think I was immigrated right around first grade to Portland, Oregon.
When did you realize that there was an emerging artist or artisan that you had to deal with on a personal level?
My mother is better at some of the stories that you know, I had three cousins that we were all the same age within about 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And always played together in Portland. And the mothers would do that, you know, it takes a community thing that all the kids would be with one mother,
Right.
and then they'd be with the other mother and the other mother, so they would be able to do jobs or
Right.
whatever they had to do. So we'd all be together, the three boys. And my mother says that one of my aunts called up and said, have you ever seen what he can sculpt? And she said, what's he doing? He said, well, they're doing horses today. And she said, well, don't all kids make clay horses? And she
Right.
said, yeah, but not like this. You know, the other two kids, my
Right.
two cousins, weren't, you know, like this. And I was like making the mane and rolling tails and that kind of stuff. So
I've had a chance on my personal time and solitude when I first purchased the book to go through it, and I felt so honored to have this material shared, not just to own one, but have it shared with me. And I said, wow, what a great thing.
yeah.
Tell us about the book. And
Well, you know, originally Lucasfilm called me and said, would you write a book? So as we started to finish the book, the publishers said, well, how about we've had real success with these limited edition books, that there's only 3,000 of these. And so they said, can you kind of come up with an idea of what would be on the inside of the book? And I didn't realize that what they meant was, can you come up with one thing? And what I did was I did a proposal for about 5 or 6 things. It's got this magnetic case. Up in the upper part, we start out with, there's a little land speeder, there's a little C-3PO that goes in the land speeder, there's a R2-D2 that's hard to get out, there's a Ben Kenobi that sits in that little car, and a Luke down in here.
Luke Skywalker, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and Death Star pieces, you know. That,
Okay, and the Death Star, for those of you that can't rightly recall, was the weapon of mass destruction.
Yeah, the original one.
Right,
yeah.
the original.
and actually the real one, too.
Right.
So let's lift it up a little
Okay,
bit.
right.
There's a DVD in here, kind of a me talking about the making of Star Wars, and all kinds of different slides. But the big deal, or the way we started out originally, was with this book. So this is the coffee table book that's on the inside of here.
That's fantastic.
And there's the book. Let's see if I can turn to an interesting page.
Beautiful book.
It has a lot of fold-outs, you know, a lot of big pictures of walkers and tauntauns.
We're gonna.
A lot of, you know, emphasis on us making all these things.
Fantastic.
That's probably Darth Vader's
Darth
ship.
Vader's ship. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Used to have one.
Yeah.
Well-
There's also a bas-relief of back of the Millennium Falcon. And I was, it turned out that, you know, I guess the way I did models and everything was attractive to everybody. So they tended to give me the parts like the rear end of the Millennium Falcon.
Right.
That I got to do that mandala kind of thing where the
Yes.
engines and
Yeah.
I did lots of different parts of that. But how we got to this point, you know, in '75, I was asked to work on a science fiction film, no particular science fiction film. They probably said the word Star Wars, but I didn't, had no idea what in the world that would be. I was hired to just work for 2 months to build spaceships, the Death Star, TIE fighters, that kind of thing. And you know, 2 months turned into 2 years, 2 years turned into 20, and 20 turned into 38 or something like that.
Really? That long?
30, yeah,
That long.
a long number of years. Longest job I've ever had.
Great. Great.
Probably ever will.
Yeah.
But I was an art major. You know, I was going to be a college professor. That's what I was originally intending to do. You know, the job market wasn't terribly good after the energy crisis in 1974, 75.
Yes.
It was really bad. You know, as it goes through cycles,
Right.
a lot of people experience that. Turned out that, say, in the mid 70s, there were parks next to McDonald's called McDonald's Park. And they had, like, the Hamburglar would have swings, and they would have a giant hamburger that had a slide that came out of it. And I was hired at that time to carve those big things in foam.
And this is in what city?
In LA.
In
I
Los
lived in
Angeles.
LA then.
All right.
And in the process of doing that, I came across somebody I went to college with. And he said, hey, we're looking for model makers desperately. We couldn't find model makers. And he knew me and knew what I did.
Right.
And he said, do you think you can come by and check out the facility and maybe work with us for a while?
Right.
You know, I knew how to build models. I'd worked in industrial design prior to that.
Right. Sure.
And had a good eye and a good hand for things and new materials and all. But, you know, when we did the first Star Wars, we had really no idea we were going to do a second one or a third one or a fourth one or a fifth, sixth one. So, you know, we were just going one project at a time.
Right.
And when Star Wars was finished, you know, the crowds lined up in front of Grauman's Chinese and all around the United States kind of led one to think that we were going to make more films. And it was true. Eventually we moved, George Lucas moved about 6 of us up north here. And we started over again, you know, empty warehouse. And I mean, really an empty warehouse. When you went into this building, there was nothing on the inside. And then we asked for, about 3 or 4 or 5 of us asked for big, long 2x4s,
Right.
12-foot, 18-foot 2x4s. And then we laid the 2x4s where we thought the hallway should be and, you know, where the office should be and that kind of stuff. And then had the carpenters. So they didn't even do the drawing stage. Just said, well, build a wall here, build a wall there, put a door here, that kind of thing. So I continued making models. I was the head of the model shop. And say we were originally building desktop models, everything from 2 feet to 3 feet to 10 feet, that kind of thing. And eventually digital was good at making individual spaceships. And if it moved quickly, the blur made digital a better choice. If it stayed still or moved a little bit, then models were the best choice at that time. Yeah. So it transitioned into making not so much desktop models like 3, 4, 5, 8 feet as making really big models that were more of an environmental kind of a model that, like example, Mustafar, which was done, the volcano planet in the last film,
Right.
was really more the size of a tennis court or 3/4 of a tennis court.
That's a big
It
model.
was a very much bigger model, and it could, it could lift on the back so the lava would flow faster.
Right, right.
And it was a multi-$100,000 model to do that.
Right. I remember the last time I paid a visit over to the model shop or the ranch, whichever one it was. You were working on the Star Trek movie, and when I went in the room, the entire room was filled with I've never seen a model that big.
Yeah.
And as you know, when you first came to Skyline High School in Oakland for me, I think it's in the 80s, the late 80s, that I had all of the students involved in a model building project, and there were models out at that time of all of George Lucas's designs that the kids could build, which involved reading and comprehension and skills for building. But I didn't know there was a model that large built.
It would be, kind of as big as this room.
Wow.
A little bit bigger than this room.
Wow.
But they were almost like sculpting projects, really, is what they are. Mustafar was a lava planet, so it had to have mountains and troughs for the lava to flow through. We used clear plex, I think 1-inch thick plex, that the lava flowed over the top of, and then we had very, very strong stage lights like these up underneath with orange gels and things like that that would cause the lava, the material that we flowed down there was kind of a clear, thick, like ketchup but clear.
Right.
And we'd light it from underneath, and it would look like hot lava, and then we'd throw broken up burnt cork on the surface at the top, and that would come down and reform the crust.
Amazing. Creativity on the job. Now, what impressed me was when they had the race in the Coliseum.
You're talking about the pod race arena. It was, sometimes you come to a juncture where CG is busy, computer graphics are really busy, we're really busy, but there'll be an opportunity for one or another. And in that particular case, computer graphics was overworked. And
overworked? Explain that.
Overworked, they had so much work trying to get the film out.
Oh, I see.
So then they asked the model shop, well, can you come up with a solution? And the problem was we had this big stadium. Imagine a stadium about 2 cars connected, that big and about as high as 2 cars, a little bit bigger than that. And it had a stadium full of people. And how do you make that stadium full of people slightly move, slightly scintillate? And so we came up with the idea of dyeing Q-tips, all different colors. There were about 450,000 of them, believe it or not.
450,000 Q-tips.
Yeah, and we had to come up with you can't have people individually doing that many things. You have to come up with a system. And somebody came up with a trough that had vibrators underneath, and it would cause the Q-tips to all fall down into a row, and then they were gathered up and they were dipped, and then they would go back in another trough and vibrate to dry. And we didn't fill up the whole stadium with that many Q-tips. It was shot separately. But in the end, even though that was a viable solution, eventually computer graphics, their workload lightened up. So then they took what we had and put like a filter, a mask over the top of it that caused more scintillation, and then they animated different characters walking up the staircases. A lot of times the solutions are like that. They're the best solution in the time you have and the money you have to spend.
In the cities and the waterfall.
Oh, yeah.
I thought the waterfalls were interesting with the water pouring down.
Yeah, that was in Theed City, probably.
Right. What was the spin on the waterfall?
Again, that was a thing of, model shop had a bit more time, a little bit more relaxed schedule near the end of production, and so one of the guys theorized that sugar flowing down black velvet would look like a waterfall.
Regular CNH sugar, sort of,
CNH sugar,
or whatever.
No, just regular sugar.
Regular sugar.
And we would make like in black velvet, you'd make like a little precipice, and then we had a big box that would pour sugar down, and where you couldn't see it, the black velvet would come up, and then it would appear at the end of the precipice and then fall down, and then maybe hit another little precipice that would cause it to and it would lap down.
Genius.
And so we filmed a couple of those one day, and they did look really good. The problem was that the ants, even though we're in a studio, the ants.
I was about to ask that question.
You wouldn't believe it, but even if you probably dropped a donut here and it sat here for 3 days, you'd have ants from somewhere,
Right,
that
right.
would show up.
Most-
But eventually we switched to use salt, did the same thing, did numbers of different experiments off of the velvet. And again, the same thing happened as CG was freed up before the end of the film shoot. I don't know, you wouldn't know it, but there's a thing that we had at work. It was called, a shot was CBB. Everybody look at it and say, yeah, it looks okay, it looks good, but it's a CBB. Could have been better.
Could have been better.
Could have been better. So what it means is at the end of the very production, when everybody's time is more freed up
Right.
before the release date, then they start going back to the CBBs,
Right.
and they determine which are the ones that are the worst, and head towards the ones that are better.
I'll remember that next time I'm teaching art.
Yeah, right.
Rather than give an F,
Really?
I'll give
Yeah,
a
really.
CBBB.
That's right, instead of an F.
Instead of an F, and that won't crush
Crush anybody. Yeah, it
student.
could have been better.
Right.
Because
Well-
something always could be better.
Always could be better.
Because there was only, when we did the first Star Wars, there was only 7 model makers. So, and by the time we did Sith, there were about 102 model makers.
Okay.
Probably on this one here, Attack of the Clones, there was probably maybe 60, 70 model makers or
Yes,
something like that.
yes.
Because the same amount of time, we only had a year and a half to do the film. Each film is usually done in a year and a half,
Okay.
year and a half.
And the CGI on episode 2 and 3, it began to enhance itself. If you got to 3, was it any
yeah,
better?
definitely. Where they really tested their metal was on the release of Star Wars, the re-release of Star
Okay,
Wars.
re-release, all right.
Yeah, because then they did those walking beasts in the background
Right,
and
right.
added a lot of stuff. When you look past at CG work, old CG work doesn't tend to look as good as old model work because it had to grow. I used
Right.
to describe it as like, baby learns how to crawl
Right,
and then
right.
eventually learns how to walk.
right.
And CG was just barely learning to walk at that time.
Right. We were reached,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was hooked. And I think one of my favorite outside of the Star Wars was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And I think, I know you're shy about your Oscar, but that is the one I think that the Academy Award
Yeah.
awarded you on for your work in that, which is fantastic.
In the mid-'80s, we did Temple of Doom.
Right.
And I
Great.
was asked just recently on the computer, how did this happen? I answer a few questions, not zillions of questions.
Right.
But it was the airplane, the trimotor, that Indy, Short Round, and Willie escaped, or they thought they were heading
Right.
one direction, and the pilots have jumped out and turned the gas off, or let the gas flow out. And so we built an airplane that was about 3 feet long, the trimotor, and it runs on these little tiny wires that you can't see.
Just 3 feet? Is
3
that all
feet,
it
yeah.
was? Yeah.
It goes downhill on these wires, 2 wires.
Right.
Well, it has to hit the top of the mountain is the one pivotal moment where a wheel hits the snow, and it's like danger is going to happen. They're going to crash.
right.
And the problem is if you take an airplane that runs on wires, it doesn't weigh very much. And if its wheel hits the top of a snow mountain, even though it was baking soda, it would tend to jiggle the airplane,
Right.
which would look phony.
Right.
And the solution is at the very top of the mountain, there's a balloon underneath the snow that's only partially filled up. So the balloon could have probably been this big, but say it's filled about this big. And then just down below that is a plastic tube, just a little bit smaller than the balloon. And the balloon is held down with a rubber band. So there's a rubber band that's not terribly tight, but tight enough. And then the snow is built up around that. And then on the wheel of the airplane, there's a sewing needle that's about 2 inches long.
Wow.
So as the plane goes into the snow, the sewing needle goes through the 1 inch of snow and hits the balloon. But the balloon does puff up a little bit, but the great majority of it, since it has snow on top, baking soda snow, the air goes down. 80–90% of the air goes down,
Right.
just 10% puffs up.
Right.
And then basically the wheel isn't going through anything except air with baking soda snow flying through the air.
Oh.
So the airplane didn't jiggle or anything like that. But those are, a lot of the shots that we did are, not only it's just the model, but it's the action that happens.
Yeah.
You know, the water that flows out the model.
Now, that's what I wanted to get to when
Yeah.
you're running out of the cave and,
Yeah.
and the huge, I call it a cup had been overturned and you're running.
Yeah, we dumped
Tell us
about, that we were talking about the water out the rock face wall, and then Indiana Jones, Willie, and Short Round running down through the
Right,
cave
right.
trying to
That
escape.
same- yes.
And the water, Mola Ram has dumped this big tank over.
Right. What's his name?
Mola Ram?
Right.
Mola Ram.
The crazy high priest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a big water tank that we made. It held about maybe the weight of a Volkswagen, 1.5 Volkswagens of water.
Wow.
It was like a big tub, like 5 feet across, about 6 feet deep, kind of stuff. Had a type of trap door. And the problem that we knew was, as the water came flowing down the tunnel, you tend to get water droplets kind of flying up towards the camera. Camera's down here, the water tunnel's here, and Indiana Jones and the kid and Willie were all entered in there later. You know, they weren't in. We didn't have miniature people.
Right.
But so you have these big giant droplets of water, which give it away, because drops of water really are only like a one size. You can't, unless you atomize it out of a mister, you can't get droplets. They're always about the same, you know,
the same,
size.
yeah.
And so that gives it away. And so what we had to come up with a solution of what to do. And what we did is we got a giant air tank, compressed air tank, and these big hoses that they use for jackhammers and things like that. And we ran those where you couldn't see them, but they all face the way the water is coming down the tunnel. And they were turned on just as the water is approaching them, and it breaks up the air blasting back, breaks up all the little water droplets.
Right.
It can't hold back 2,000 pounds of water.
Right.
You know, the 2,000 pounds of water is going to come forward no matter what, but it causes the water to kind of leap up and be very, like it's alive almost,
yes.
but it doesn't let the droplets
Yeah.
head towards camera.
Right.
But we did that so we could do it over and over again. And a little amusing story about that tunnel was that we started with a sonotube, one of those cardboard tubes that they cast big columns on the freeway with.
Right.
And we built the tunnel and the walls and the beams and the rocks and everything into it. As we built it more and more in, only smaller model makers could make it down through the tunnel. So eventually Randy, one of the women in the model shop, one of the model makers, that she was the only one that could
Squeeze in.
You know, being 95 pounds, she could crawl through the tunnel and work in there during the day, whereas everybody else was too big for it. You know?
It was amazing. I was just, I got to have this film. I got to have this film. Okay. While we're still in the tunnel, briefly, the coal car ride.
Yeah, like the little roller coaster.
The little
ride.
roller coaster, and it was jumping tracks and landing here and landing there and switching, and it had us all in the audience riding with it.
Yeah, those mine cars are only about 8-9 inches long, and they have little stop motion figures, 3 stop motion figures in them, and we basically imagine a room like this. We built basically a roller coaster ride around this room, and the camera would be in the center. And then we built cave walls and things out of, we use a real thick aluminum foil that's like, it's about 12, 15 times thicker than the foil that you use at home. And you know, you get big giant sheets of it, you crinkle it up, paint it with kind of a rubbery black material, and then use Durham's rock hard putty and speckle it up and everything, and then paint it the way you want it. It looks just like cave walls, just like rocks. So we would bring those up to the back side, and when the mine cars were filmed, since the stop motion characters in there have to be changed every 1 or 2 frames, it was done, you know, they'd shoot a frame, they'd stop, they'd go over, the guy would manipulate the figures so that Indy's hand is moving.
Tedious.
And then, it takes a long time, and then they would do another frame, then they would get up and manipulate it again, another frame, manipulate it, another frame, that kind of thing. And then we also made a camera that ran along the very own tracks that the mine car was, so it could either chase it or in front of it looking backwards. There's shots that way too. But each time it was all set up to also to the computer, the controller. So
Right.
the camera frame and the movement on the mine car was all set up so it was timed together. And of course, when the mine car jumps across the precipice, that never, ever, ever could have happened, you know?
But that was what was so great about it, with the music,
Yeah.
John Williams and the music and the car jumping.
Yeah, that thing would have dropped like
right.
a like
you know
a
that's
rock,
not going to
yeah.
happen in the sparks flying. That's
Yeah.
what made it so juicy
Yeah.
that it would never happen.
But there was
Yeah.
a rod on the back side, you know, with
Right.
a motion controller that caused the mine car to
that
leap
lifted it and
and
tear it
made
over.
it just land just in the right spot, you know.
Fantastic.
But it was pretty perfect,
It
wasn't it?
was. I look at it today in the 21st century, and I'm just as
Yeah.
excited when I see it at home as,
Yeah.
as it did.
Yeah, you expect there would have been blood and death.
Yeah, yeah. But we were all on that ride.
Yeah.
You must remember at
Yeah.
ILM, everyone that saw that was on
Yeah.
that ride.
Yeah.
And that's what made it so thrilling to go through
Yeah.
something
I
like that.
do have to qualify and say that whenever, of course, Indiana Jones and Willie and Short Round are seen close up,
Right.
that is a real one. The mine car is about
Right.
6 feet long and everything like that.
Right.
And that was done in England. And again, they set up a roller coaster, kind of. It rised 6 feet and down 3 feet and
Wow.
like that.
Wow. This,
That kind of thing. So it didn't go much, you know.
Yeah.
But they could get it going with, you know, gravity and up and over.
enough to get the right shot.
Yeah,
you
but
know.
they would do the close-ups there, that whenever you see it from further away, then that's
Right.
a model.
Right. Where do you see Star Wars going from here?
Oh, boy.
From your perspective.
You know, I would hope that they would return to the aged universe. George Lucas described that he, when we were doing Star Wars, he didn't want a universe that looked like a Flash Gordon movie where
Right,
walls
right.
were shiny and,
Right.
you know, everything looked perfect.
Right.
Granted, when it's on the Death Star, it has shiny floors.
Right.
So I'm hoping that they do return to that kind of a look of the film. My hope is that they don't overload every single frame. You know, if you look at the frames of Star Wars as compared to the frames in Sith, there's maybe 5 or 6, 7 elements in one single, say, still from
Right.
Star Wars, whereas by the time you reach Sith, there can be dozens of different
Yeah.
things happening and moving around. And I think that the look, that simpler, more graphic look, I think was more successful in the first Star Wars.
They were all genius. We're going to have to go, and
Okay.
we will talk with you again. And I enjoyed having the Force with me again.
Oh, good.
Today.
I'm glad you enjoyed the book, too.
Oh, you're the only one that gets to touch it.
His kids don't get to touch it.
No,
And they're too old to play with it.
Too old to play with it. Too old to play with it. But I enjoy it, and as well as all of the movies. Thank you for being with me today
Oh,
and
sure.
taking the time to come over.
Well, thank
I
you,
know we
everybody,
have
too.
A busy schedule. Dr. Don, the Wizard of Art, right here in Oakland with the Force. May the Force be with you.